Hey everyone, and welcome back. So now this is the second video. So we're picking back up where we left off. We talked about deontology versus consequentialism. Now we're going to talk about utilitarianism. And so utilitarianism, uh, there are a couple historical figures who really sort of created utilitarianism and formulated it. There's someone named Bentham, who sort of is the original creator. And then there's John Stuart Mill, who is pictured here. Uh, and John Stuart Mill, who also has some famous writings in political philosophy on rights and liberty and things like that. John Stuart Mill sort of altered utilitarianism and popularized it and sort of developed it into the theory that we know today, uh, or at least that philosophers know today. So utilitarianism comes from the word utility, meaning, utility, something useful that you can utilize. So the goal of the utilitarian is to produce as much utility as possible. Utilitarianism is the view that what makes an action good or bad, morally speaking, is how much utility is produced by that action. So it's a form of consequentialism because how much utility is produced by an action is a certain kind of outcome, right? So consequentialism says what matters in morality is outcomes. Did it have a good outcome or a bad outcome? But consequentialism by itself doesn't tell you which outcomes matter, which outcomes are good, which outcomes are bad. What are the outcomes we want? Which outcomes decide whether or not your action was good? And that's the question utilitarianism is here to answer. Utilitarianism says that what makes an action good or bad is specifically how much utility that action produces. So that's the outcome that matters in morality. The best outcome is the most utility. Whatever action would maximize utility would have the effect or outcome of producing the most utility possible. That's the morally best action. So utilitarianism is an answer to the question, what outcomes are good? What outcomes are bad? Which outcomes matter in morality? And so the morally best action will be the one that maximizes utility. The morally worst action will be the one that minimizes utility. And so, like I said, this is consequentialist because utility production is an outcome. It's an effect that the action has on the world. So it is a consequence of the action. Amount of utility produced is one of the consequences of an action. So utilitarianism tells us that what makes an action good or bad is specifically the outcome it has or the effect it has on utility. More utility is a better outcome, less utility is a worse outcome. So, what is utility? It's because it's not like utility bills where it's talking about electricity and gas and Wi-Fi and internet, things like that. This is utility in a sort of more abstract sense. If any of you have taken economics classes or game theory classes, you may have read or heard about utility and utils as a sort of term of art, a sort of fake unit to measure utility. But if you have it, that's fine too. Because the utilitarian has a very specific definition of utility, and that's happiness. Happiness is utility. So more utility means more happiness. Less utility means less happiness. So the maximum utility you could produce is the greatest total amount of happiness that you could produce. So the morally best action is the action that produces the most happiness in the world. That's the best action. So utilitarians accept what John Stuart Mill calls the greatest happiness principle. So Mill says actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. And here, reverse of happiness means pain, basically, unhappiness. So morally right means produces happiness. An action is more right or morally better if it produces more happiness. And it's morally worse or less right, less morally good, if it produces less happiness. And so morally right means produces happiness, and morally wrong means produces unhappiness. That is what morally right and morally wrong mean. It's all about happiness production. That's what really matters in morality. Are you making the world a happier place, or are you making the world a less happy place? That's the key moral question that we want to ask. So, taking the utilitarian for granted at this point, just sort of saying, sure, producing more happiness is what it means to be morally right. Producing less happiness is what it means to be morally wrong. Great. But what's happiness? Happiness is kind of a vague concept. I think we all want happiness. We all want to be happy. That's pretty much a given. No one wants to be unhappy. No one's sitting there thinking, man, if only I were less happy. Maybe next year I'll be unhappy, but now I'm sort of burdened by this stupid happiness. That's not a thing. No one's ever said that since the dawn of time. But defining exactly what happiness is going to be important for us to be able to say whether or not an action is right or wrong. We need to be able to recognize happiness in other people in order to figure out whether our action is good or bad. So John Stuart Mill's definition of happiness is pleasure, basically. Mill says, by happiness is intended pleasure and the absence of pain. By unhappiness is intended pain and the privation of pleasure. So just to put that another way, happiness equals pleasure and no pain. Unhappiness equals pain and no pleasure. So the more pleasure you feel, the happier you are. And the more pain you feel, the less happy you are. So if you feel a lot of pleasure and also some pain, you might be happy, but you would be happier if that pain was gone. And you would be less happy if the pleasure was gone. So more pleasure and less pain means more happiness. And more pain and less pleasure means unhappiness. That's the definition of happiness we're working with here. So pleasure and the absence of pain. That's happiness, according to John Stuart Mill. So the more pleasure an action causes, right, the more ethically right an action is. The more pain an action causes, the more ethically wrong the action is. So kicking someone in the shin is morally wrong. Not because there's some magic rule that you can't kick people in the shin, but because being kicked in the shin hurts. So you have caused pain and therefore caused unhappiness by kicking someone in the shin. So you have done something morally wrong. That's why kicking someone in the shin is wrong on the utilitarian picture. So an action that produces lots of pleasure and a little pain might be better than an action that produces no pleasure and no pain, right? So utilitarianism doesn't really have much of a sort of black and white, this action is right and this action is wrong. These are the right actions, these are the wrong actions. It's sort of a scale. How right or wrong was the action? Well, we look at the amount of pleasure it produced and the amount of pain it produced. So if you do something that produces no pleasure or pain for anyone, it does nothing. Like you don't get any joy out of it. It doesn't hurt you at all. No one else gets anything out of it. That's a perfectly neutral action. It's not good or bad, morally speaking. So that's sort of perfectly neutral. But an action that produces lots of pleasure and very little pain, and produces a little bit of pain though, that might be morally better, because the amount of pleasure it produces, this action, will offset the pain. So just to pick a sort of random, dumb little example, if you can prevent yourself from getting the flu by getting a flu shot, all right, there's a little bit of pain in that flu shot. I mean, they're stabbing a needle into your arm. It hurts a little bit. Not a lot, but it hurts a little bit. But then the pleasure of not having the flu, the pleasure of being healthy all through flu season, outweighs that little pain when you get the flu shot. So that is a better action than not getting the flu shot. Not getting the flu shot, no pain, no pleasure either, because you don't have the assurance that you'll be healthy all through flu season. You might well get a flu shot. But if you feel sort of relief at knowing you won't get the flu, or that you almost definitely won't get the flu, then that might outweigh the little pain of the flu shot. And so it's a better action. It is better to get the flu shot and put up with that little bit of pain in exchange for the relief and health that comes with a flu shot. It might be better to do that than to do nothing, which has no pain or pleasure associated with it. That's neutral, but the flu shot's good, because the pleasure of knowing you won't get the flu is outweighs the pain of getting a flu shot. So utilitarians think that producing more pleasure and less pain is sort of the key to morality. That's what it means for an action to be morally right, or to be morally good, is that you produce more pleasure than pain. But I want to be clear here. When utilitarians talk about producing happiness or producing pleasure in the absence of pain as sort of the central issue in morality, they do not mean your own happiness specifically. So when utilitarians say that the morally best thing is whatever produces the most happiness, they do not mean produces the most happiness for you. It's not a pursuit of your own happiness. It's not a pursuit of your own pleasure and the avoidance of your own pain. That's not utilitarianism. That's hedonism. That's a whole different thing. That's not a theory of morality. Hedonism. That's not a theory of morality. It's more like an absence of morality. It's a pure self-interested pursuit of pleasure and short-term happiness. Utilitarianism is concerned about the total amount of happiness on earth. So it's the total amount of happiness in the world. So it's not just your happiness. You can't pursue your own happiness and call yourself utilitarian. If you are making yourself happy at the expense of other people's happiness, then you are behaving morally wrongly. You are doing something morally wrong on the utilitarian picture. You are sacrificing other people's happiness for your own happiness. And as long as the sacrifice in other people's happiness is greater than the happiness you personally gain, you are doing something morally wrong on the utilitarian picture. So it's the total amount of happiness that matters in morality. So it's not just your own happiness. And also, it's not how many people are happy. So utilitarians don't necessarily care about the number of happy people. One person who's incredibly happy is worth more than 5 people who are pretty happy. You know, they're all right. They're doing pretty well. You know, they're like happy-ish. Even if they are happy, if they're only a little happy, that one extremely happy person can outweigh their happiness, can be more important. So it's the total amount of happiness. So it's not, we're not counting happy people. We're measuring happiness. And so if you have an option of making 20 people a little bit happy, or making one person 50 times happier than that, utilitarianism says make that one person 50 times happier than these other people would be. Because, maybe make up a unit, each of the 20 people, maybe you give each of them $1 and they all get one happiness unit off of that. Or you take those $20 and you give it to one person and they get 50 happiness units. If you give the $20 to these 20 people, you've produced 20 units of happiness in the world. But if you give it all to the one person, you've produced 50 units of happiness in the world. And now I don't know what a unit of happiness is. I'm not worried about that. Utilitarians aren't really worried about it either, to be honest. John Stuart Mill certainly isn't. But it can sometimes be helpful to sort of talk about units of happiness when we're trying to compare. So one person who's extremely happy versus 20 people who are like a little happy. Utilitarianism doesn't necessarily say aim for the 20 slightly happy people. If the one person's happiness will outweigh the 20 people's happiness, and you can choose between those two scenarios, utilitarianism says pick whichever scenario has the greatest total happiness. So maybe it's the one person who's extremely happy. Maybe it's 20 people being a little bit happy. It depends on how happy that one person's going to be. So when you're choosing what to do, what outcomes or what actions to take, what outcomes to bring about, utilitarianism will say aim for the outcome with the greatest total amount of happiness. Whoever might have that happiness, if the happiness is spread out over 100 people, if it's spread out over 3 people, if it's spread out over people you know, if it's strangers, if it includes you, if it doesn't include you, doesn't matter. Just the greatest total amount of happiness you can bring about. However that might be divided amongst people. How that happiness is divided up among the people of the world, not the main concern for utilitarians. The main concern for utilitarians is how much happiness there is, not who has it or how many people have it. So no one person is special. Your happiness doesn't matter than other people's happiness. The happiness of people you know doesn't matter more than the happiness of people you don't know. So in this way, utilitarianism is impartial in the sense that it doesn't allow you to give preferential treatment to people you know. Some moral theories do allow you to do that. I think Confucianism, for example, says that you have specific duties to your family, for example. And so you have obligations to them that you don't have to other people. And so you should sometimes, ignore other people and set them aside to fulfill your obligations to your family. Utilitarianism disagrees. Utilitarianism says you should treat your family exactly the same way you treat strangers. Their happiness is not more important than the happiness of strangers. You are not special. Your family is not special. Your children, your parents, your best friends, none of them are special. No one person's happiness can be given priority over anyone else's happiness. What we are worried about in utilitarianism is the total amount of happiness in the world. So it doesn't matter who has it, how many people it's divided across, doesn't matter. Total happiness in the world is all that matters in morality, according to the utilitarian. So they only care about the outcome. How much happiness was produced by your action? If it was a lot, then you did something morally good. If it was none, or if you produced unhappiness, you made people less happy, then you did something morally wrong. So for the utilitarian, that means the end always justifies the means, right? It always justifies the means, because the end, the outcome, is all we are concerned about, the total outcome. So as long as the end is producing the greatest total happiness, the end will always justify the means. Any methods we might use to bring about the greatest total happiness are okay, as long as we take the effects of those methods into account. All right. So there are some words missing at the bottom here. So for example, utilitarian will say we should always kill one to save five in the trolley problem, even in the organ case, even in the organ donor case. So the utilitarian says 5 lives means more happiness than 1 life. The 5 people will go on to experience more happiness in their lives than the 1 person would. All else being equal, all 6 people in the scenario are going to feel roughly the same amount of happiness over the course of their lives. And so if 5 people survive and feel 5 persons worth of happiness, that's better than if only 1 person survives and goes on to only feel 1 person's worth of happiness. So in the organ case, you should murder the 1 person to steal their organs and give them to the 5 sick people who need organs, because then that's the better outcome, because there will be more happiness in the world if there are 5 people running around feeling happiness rather than just the 1 person running around feeling happiness. More people means more happiness, all else being equal. And so you should always kill the 1 to save 5. You should pull the lever. You should push the person off the bridge. You should kill the person in the hospital to harvest their organs. Because the method by which you kill 1 to save 5 doesn't matter. As long as you're not like torturing them to death and producing so much pain in the 1 person that it outweighs all happiness the 5 people could ever feel. Like, as long as you're not doing any of that, then you should, on the utilitarian picture, kill the 1 to save 5 every time. Because what we're worried about is the total amount of happiness in the world as an outcome of our actions. And so by saving the 5 lives, that will produce all the happiness those 5 people will feel from now on. If they die, then they won't feel any happiness because they'll be dead. But if they live, they'll feel happiness for the rest of their lives. Not constantly, not all the time. They'll be sad sometimes. But all the happiness they would feel if they survived, that's part of the outcome of the action. So saving 5 lives so that 5 people go out feeling happiness for the rest of their lives, that totally outweighs 1 person's death, where that 1 person was going to go out and feel, 1 person's worth of happiness in the rest of their lives. And so depriving that 1 person's happiness out of the total happiness in the world in exchange for adding in 5 people's happiness to the total happiness in the world, that is morally good on the utilitarian picture. You are increasing the happiness in the world, because in the future, there will now be 5 people feeling happiness instead of just 1. And so you've done the morally right thing on the utilitarian picture. And that's a surprising thing to people. That feels like the wrong answer. Harvesting organs to most people feels like the wrong answer to the organ case. So, Kantianism has its own sort of weird answers. You have to tell the truth to the murderer at the door. These are the utilitarian weird answers. you have to kill the one person to harvest their organs so you can save 5 lives. It's a weird answer. It's not the intuitively correct answer. It's not the answer that seems right when you look at the thought experiment. So, why be utilitarian? If you're going to have to kill people to harvest their organs to save 5 lives and things like that, that feel so morally wrong, why be utilitarian? Why think that utilitarianism gets it right? Well, Aristotle, who's a Greek philosopher, lived around 2,500 years ago, give or take, a couple hundred years BCE. Aristotle said happiness is the ultimate goal of all human action. Aristotle thought that if you ask someone why they want money, why they want a job, why they want to eat, why they want a new car, why they want to have children, why they want to get married, he thought those are all very reasonable questions that should have answers. If they want the thing, they should be able to explain why, what they want it for. But the one thing that doesn't apply to is happiness. If you ask someone why they want to be happy, the correct answer is to stare at you and go, what? What do you mean? Why do I want to be happy? What are you talking about? That's the right answer. Because of course you want to be happy. You don't want happiness for some other purpose. You want happiness for its own sake. Aristotle thought happiness is the one thing that we want for its own sake. Everything else we want for the purpose of some other goal. And that leads to this sort of chain of goals, like I want to go to college so that I can get a job. I want a job so that I can make money. I want money so that I can afford a house and food and clothes. I want a house and food and clothes so that I can be comfortable and enjoy my life. And I want to be comfortable and enjoy my life so that I can be happy. Now, maybe that's not exactly how the chain goes for you, but something like that, Aristotle thinks, is going to happen for all of our desires. They're all going to lead back to happiness. Our ultimate goal in everything we do, according to Aristotle, is happiness. We want to be happy. That is the driving force behind all human action. We may not always consciously realize it. We may be counterproductive sometimes and think this will make us happy when really it won't. But ultimately, our goal is always happiness. For any other goal, you can say, why do you want that? And owe the person an answer. But why do you want to be happy makes no sense. We want happiness for its own sake, and it's the only thing we want purely for its own sake. So happiness is the ultimate goal of all human action. And Mill agrees with this. And so here's a complicated 1800s-y sounding paragraph from Mill. Mill says, the theory of life on which this theory of morality is grounded, the theory of morality being utilitarianism, the theory of life on which utilitarianism is grounded is that pleasure and freedom from pain are the only things desirable as ends. And that all desirable things, which are as numerous in the utilitarian as in any other scheme, are desirable either for the pleasure inherent in themselves or as a means to the promotion of pleasure and the prevention of pain. So what he's saying here is utilitarianism is grounded in the idea, this theory of life, this idea that pleasure and the absence of pain are the only things desirable for their own sake. And everything else that we desire is either desirable because it provides immediate pleasure or because it is a means or a tool for pleasure or the absence of pain later. That's the only reason we desire anything, is towards the ultimate end of pleasure in the absence of pain. What we really want is pleasure without pain. Everything else we say we want is just a tool to get pleasure or to avoid pain. Pleasure good, pain bad, and that's the whole theory of human desires and actions. That's Mill's theory, lines up a lot with Aristotle, clearly kind of based in Aristotle. Aristotle defines happiness a little bit differently, but the same basic concept. Happiness is the thing we all want inherently. Everything else we want for the sake of happiness. And so that means if you want to do good things in the world, if you want to do right by other people, if you want to make the world a better place, well, the one thing that we all want, that we all desire inherently, is happiness, is more pleasure and less pain. So if you want to do good things, if you want to do what's right, then what you should do is whatever will increase pleasure and decrease pain in the world. Whatever brings about more happiness in the world, that's what you should do. Because if you want to do what's good, well, the only thing that's inherently good is happiness. So doing good in the world means increasing happiness in the world. So we can think the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's been defended by wise philosophers like Confucius and Jesus and Mr. Rogers, the trifecta of moral philosophy. Golden rule, historically popular in some form or another. It's been defended around the globe. It seems right. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Sounds good. Now, important question. What do you actually want others to do unto you? If we're saying we should do unto others as we would have them do to us, you should do to others as you would have them do to you, we should ask, what do you actually want others to do unto you? And utilitarians think the right answer is make me as happy as possible. If you gave any other answer, then you need to think about it more, according to the utilitarian. What you really want out of life is happiness. What you ultimately want, what we want, is to be happy. So whatever our first initial reaction to the question is, whatever our initial answer was, utilitarians think ultimately the right answer, the true answer, if we really thought about it enough, we'd realize the true answer is make me as happy as possible. What I want others to do unto me is to make me as happy as possible. And so therefore, the golden rule should tell us to maximize happiness. To do unto others as we would have them do unto us means to make others as happy as possible. To make others as happy as possible. So what the golden rule tells us, once we realize that what we all want is happiness, is to maximize happiness. To make people as happy as possible. That's what we should do. So if we accept that happiness is the only inherent good, the only thing we all want for its own sake, and we try to do the right thing by other people and try to do unto others, we would have them do to us, then we should conclude that maximizing happiness, people's happiness, is the right thing to do. And any intuitions we might have to the contrary, any thoughts like in the organ case that, I don't think killing someone to harvest their organs to save 5 lives is morally right. That feels really bad. That feels morally wrong, if anything's morally wrong. That sort of thought, that intuition, that gut feeling we have, that's just a mistake. That's an error. That's an intuition that you should ignore or overcome. The utilitarian might argue, or has argued historically sometimes. Utilitarianism doesn't say that all our moral intuitions are correct. We might be wrong in some cases, because usually killing someone to harvest their organs does not maximize happiness. And so our gut reaction is going to get it wrong in the rare hypothetical case where it does maximize happiness. But we can overcome that intuition. We just have to accept it and soldier on, because we know happiness is the only thing that truly matters. And therefore, that's the thing we should focus on maximizing in the world. So John Stuart Mill, says this about happiness, the greatest happiness principle. He says, according to the greatest happiness principle, as above explained, the ultimate end, with reference to and for the sake of which all other things are desirable, whether we are considering our own or that of other people, is an existence exempt as far as possible from pain and as rich as possible in enjoyments, both in point of quantity and quality. So, I don't know if you can tell, but everyone was a terrible writer back in the 1800s. This is really confusing and poorly written, and it's a long run-on sentence full of jargon that doesn't need to be there. If you read the Mill Utilitarianism reading that was assigned and struggled, you're not alone. Over 200 years worth of people have struggled with you. It's hard. It sucks. I'm sorry. People didn't know. People couldn't really write well until the 20th century, in my view. Not to be controversial against people who are long dead, but to translate Mill into normal person talk, our ultimate goal as human beings is to live happy lives. That is our ultimate goal. That is our ultimate end. That's all that really matters to us. So that's all that should matter to us when deciding what to do unto other people. Every single human being is alike in this regard. All that any of us really matter, all that any of us really care about, all that really matters to any of us, deep down, ultimately, is happiness. So if we want to do the right thing, if we want to make the world a better place, we should maximize happiness in the world. That is the thing we all care about. If you want to help people, you should make them happy and not inflict pain on them. If you want to make the world a better place, you should make it more full of happiness than you found it. If you want to do the best thing you possibly can, do whatever creates the most happiness, because happiness is the one thing that we all agree is inherently good. And so that's why you'd want to be a utilitarian. That's the argument for utilitarianism. It's the idea that ultimately what we care about, what any of us truly care about, is happiness. And once we recognize that, the sort of unique status of happiness as the one inherent good that's universally desired, then our theory of morality should probably be happiness centric and should be focused on increasing the happiness in the world, making as much happiness as possible, because that's the universally desired thing in the world. So that's the right thing to focus on in morality, in trying to do what's best, do what's right, do what's good. And so that's sort of the argument for being utilitarian, is this view of happiness and its status as the universally desirable thing. Now, there are objections to utilitarianism, and we will touch on that in the next video. So I'm going to stop it here, and I will see you in the next video where we will talk about the utility monster.